the most famous get up, right? When they're at bottom, you know, screaming during a match. Do it, don't do it. So if it's not technical instruction, it does absolutely no good and mostly harm. Is that fair to say?
I love having these real talks, to be honest with you, because it puts things in perspective.
Put these little recording glasses on because these are behind the scenes ones. Every once in a while, I'll turn them on. Have you seen these before? The meta ones?
They make you smarter. Is that there?
I wish. I wouldn't take them off. I'd be sleeping with those things. No, they you can record. It's a camera.
That's amazing.
Like high level camera, like 4K, like it's crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I could just boom, all of a sudden, like I could take a picture and just snap it. So
Like Iron Man.
yeah, it's crazy.
It's great.
All right. We're ready?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna tell you, like, I feel like I have Brad Pitt on this podcast. I'm super excited about this because listen, I didn't grow up a wrestler, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I'm not completely obsessed with it. It's probably 75% of my TV consumption at this point.
That's it.
Right? Like technique or whatever documentaries come out, I'll watch it 3 or 4 times. It's crazy. It's crazy how it's gotten into my bloodstream. So so the thing is that I'm friends with both of you guys, right? And I'm going to introduce you guys officially, right? But I'm friends with both of you guys, and I've had individual conversations with you guys that I find super interesting. I've seen both of you struggle with I'm a dad, but I'm also a professional in what I do, right? In your case, Bobby, you're a sports psychologist, right? You were a sports psychologist for Cornell, right? You're also a lifelong wrestler, wrestling coach, the whole thing. Am I missing something?
Well, yeah, I went to Cornell. I got my degree from Ithaca College, and then when I was starting out, we built a mindset training program for wrestling that was used by the Cornell team at the time.
Okay.
And just to clarify, since we're recording here, sports psychologist, that has kind of legal ramifications. So I'm what you call a mental conditioning coach or a sports psychology professional or sports psychology consultant. My master's degree is in sport performance psychology.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. And Jody, Jody's very humble, so he's probably gonna push back on this, but Jody is what most people in the sport consider the most successful youth coach in the history of the sport.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say it. I mean, I've been a youth coach, but growing up around the sport, and Jody Strittmatter he's it on the club coaching scene. So it's definitely properly said.
Right, absolutely. So Jody's coached kids from little youth kids to the Olympics. I mean, you were in the Olympics just a couple of weeks ago with Spencer Lee, is a kid that you coach from a little baby almost.
Yeah.
Right. So, and Jody, the interesting thing about Jody is that, yes, Jody has amazing technique. Yes, Jody's an amazing coach. But what I consider Jody more than anything is almost like a kid whisperer, right? Have you seen that dog whisperer situation, right? It's amazing to see Jody with hundreds of kids in the room, and he never really raises his voice. Right. Awesome. Like the kids kind of lower their level so that they could hear him, and he talks real slow, talks real low. And it's just kids come back different mentally from a Jody camp. Right.
I believe it.
Yeah. So again, back to why we're here. Again, I've had friends with both of you guys. We've had, numerous conversations about, performance in the sport. Now, to be clear, this is going to be, both of you guys are wrestling guys, but in reality, this is going to translate what we're going to talk about today. I see it. My daughter plays tennis, for example. It translates to every sport because a sport's a sport. All right. I mean, am I off on that? Performance on a sport, what works for one works for every other sport. Performance is performance, right? So, and the unique thing is that, again, I'm friends with you guys. Both of you guys have little kids. So I've seen you guys both of you kind of struggle with like, all right, well, I'm a sports psychologist, but I'm a dad. We had that conversation. Like, so what do I say? I've seen Jody in tournaments, can't help it. You stress out, he's, cool, calm and collected Jody, but when his kids are wrestling, it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? So it's a unique thing. So I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about like that unique and have both of you together. I think, kind of feeding off each other on that. I think even both of you guys will learn some stuff on it. So what do you think? I'll start with you, Bobby. What do you think what's your biggest struggle as a sports psychologist when you're talking to little Bobby, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, what's that one time that you're like, man, what the hell, in what direction do I go here? Is there one?
Yeah, there's a lot, right? So I think that, when I'm talking to my son, whether it's wrestling or some of the other sports he does, or my daughter too, and you're thinking about those struggles, to me, I think we know the right thing to say, right? And Jody, you probably experienced this as well. Like, I know the right thing to say. I've taught it to other people. I've taught it to other parents. I've taught it to other kids, hundreds of them, right? But wait a minute, I know I'm saying the wrong thing because my emotions have got the best of me, because that's not what's supposed to come out. And so I think that, there could have been a lot of different ways to go with that question, but at a simple response for me, I think what I struggle with the most is when I know my emotions have got the best of me and I'm not necessarily sending, either with the words I'm saying or my body language or whatever it is, the message that I know is the right one that I would coach somebody else to send to their son or daughter. Right. Yeah. And I think like right there is probably what it is. And that comes back to your comments of performance is performance, right? That's me not putting my best performance out as dad, because, I know I should be calm. I know I should teach him to detach from the result and worry about the foundational things. And, I know we'll talk about some of that today, but like, man, he's wrestling, I'm jacked up and I want him to win. And I'm being honest. Right. And there's a balance between kind of authenticity and the struggles that you're properly bringing out that we have as a dad, versus hey, like, let's get back to the best part of how we can, teach elite performance. Yeah. So I think that's probably the shortest way I could say that's my biggest struggle. Jody?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah. And I guess to add to that, for me, like for my kids is like, you see what they need to work on. You have so much knowledge, but if you try to tell them, they don't want to hear it. But whenever they're ready for it and they say like, Dad, can you help me with this position? Then like they gain so much in that area. But I guess the best way to put it is like, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear kind of mentality. And whenever you try to ram it down their throat and they're not ready, they go the other way. And then you get into that frustration mode.
Yeah, I was reading an article the other day also that, it was like a parenting article. And it also said that you should always have somebody that, because your kids at some point are going to kind of push back on whatever information you're going to give them. And you should have like another parent that you trust, or a friend or somebody just relay the message for you. Same message. It'll just be a lot more receptive over there, right? So I'm wondering if you guys have, is that accurate?
Oh, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think Jody's comment and yours, that a lot of people know that the messenger is as important as the message, but I think what you're both pointing out too, and Jody, what you're alluding to, is the timing is also as important as the message and the messenger, and having people that aren't just us as dad or mom and dad or whoever is great. I mean, I think one of the things that I try to think about, not just for my kids, but all the, clients I might have is, stressing who are the people in your life, who are the mentors in your life, like somebody like Jody, right? But, like your son is a mentor to my son, right?
Right.
There are things that Elijah,
we're using
like Elijah can teach Bobby. Well, I could say the same thing. He's not going to hear it from me, right? Or he's not going to want to do it, but he sees super cool, great model Elijah. And he's like, well, I want to be like that guy. And so I think it's so important, and it takes some humility as dad, because I'm like a human being, right? I have an ego. I think that if my son would do everything I would tell him to do, this is where he could go, right? But that's, a lot of parents make that mistake. And a lot of my clients, I've had that conversation, and Jody, you've probably seen that countless years over and over again with wrestling rooms, with wrestling dads in particular, but this goes to all sports, where it's like, for us as dads, as human beings, it does take some level of humility to be like, you know what? And like, I'll just use that example with Elijah, right? I'll let your son, who's in 7th grade, right?
Yeah.
Teach my son something that probably in my heart of hearts, if I'm being honest, I'd rather teach him, but it's better for my son to let Elijah do it.
Right.
So it takes some, accepting, well, someone else is going to be better at this. And if I really want what's best for my child, I need to let them do it. Like if Jody's their coach, I need to let the coach and go be dad. That's hard though. It's easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah. And have you seen yourself in that struggle, Jody, kind of in these dual tournaments or whatever, where you kind of have to stand back and be the dad? What's the struggle there like?
Yeah. And it's hard. I guess I haven't done that too much yet. My daughter's 10, my son's 8. So I am dad and coach in one for the most part still to this day. So yeah, it's definitely been a struggle. And like you said, in the heat of the moment, you want what's best for your kid, but sometimes maybe with the emotions not done right.
Yeah. And what's listen, I've heard a lot from you, and I kind of want to hear from both of you just a little bit of how you address it, but it sounds really good on paper, but it's difficult to execute. The kind of remove yourself from the result, right? Give your full effort, right, in a tournament. Give your full effort in practice, and completely remove yourself from winning and losing, right? Man, that sounds great when you say it. It just makes all the sense in the world. It removes the pressure, right? But how do you get, again, so confirm, I guess that's correct. And if Jody could kind of see, how he makes how do we get a kid to understand that and to make it register,
Yeah. I went first last time. What does Jody say?
Yeah. I think that, so in practice, it's super easy. Like I would rather, my son, are we talking just about our kids or are we talking about?
No, kids in general. Yeah. Kids in general.
I would much rather a kid like, hey, he's a state champ. And I would much rather him go into a practice and lose that practice than win. And that means that they challenge themselves with better partners, whether they're older, bigger, whatever it is. And our best example, and we have a lot, but our best example of that, or kind of who even taught me that as a coach was Jason Nolte. It was the week before Super 32 and he went into practice and he got scored on. And I turned to his dad and I was like, what is going on with Jason today? And he was so frustrated sitting in the corner watching. And I walked up to Jason, and I'm like, what's up today? This is a big week. He's like, I just want to do a couple more positions out before the tournament. I'm like, let's turn it on. Let's get going. This is a big week. Right. And then he went down there and he like tech followed his way through, but he's good at that. Like just feel in position. It wasn't about winning and losing at practice and just like getting better. And, he taught me that as a coach. And like, cause I was always taught like you win a practice and if you can win 2,000-0, that's what you do at practice.
Yeah. And before I forget this question, just to add on to that. So I don't know if I talked to you about it, but yeah, I think I did. I sent you the video. So there's this MMA fighter. How much do you follow MMA, Joe? Do you follow it at all or not? Not really? All right, maybe the wrestlers, right? So Holloway, right? This Holloway kid, well, he's 30 years old now, and he's a legend now, right? So, but they brought up this old video. He's either 15 or 16 years old, and they're interviewing him about winning and losing, right? And man, he didn't have much parenting. He admits there his mom was heavily into drugs. He didn't really have any parental figures. But the kid it seemed like he was just kind of born with the ability to understand. So he explains that he's like, I just don't get it. And when you see the article, I don't know if we could put that, guys, when we do the actual clip, we could put the article, not the article, the clip, but he's like, I don't understand why people quit. Like if you just give it your effort, your full effort, and you don't quit, at least you're happy with yourself and you're not a loser. He says loser. Right, because he's with a Hawaiian accent, but he's like, if you give it your all, you're not a loser. Like, I don't get it. Like, and he just didn't understand that. So you saying that story there is kids that are born with that because it seems like the adults were learning from the kid, right? Yeah. Like that's really the way it should be. And you're kind of learning. So there are kids that are kind of born with that emotional intelligence. Do you see that often or?
Yeah. And again, I just think everyone's different. That's my thing as a coach is just identifying at a younger age, or as young as I can, kind of, I guess how the kid reacts. Spencer Lee was not that. If he gave up one takedown at practice, he was beside himself. He was so upset. Like he would have the best practice of his life, and then he give up a score, he'd try something and get caught on his back, and his dad would call me and be like, Jody, what happened to Spencer tonight? Like he said,
He gave up one takedown.
I'm like, he looked incredible. Like, yeah, he got caught one time, he got taken down, but he looked incredible. He's like, he came home and he was ripping and roaring through it, like his bedroom, and he was so upset. So I think everyone's different, and
right. So there's no real right or wrong, right?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I think everyone's different, and just kind of helping coach them along the way. And obviously, I think his coaches, even throughout us and his college coaches, and even to this day, have helped him along that. Like, I guess progressing. And the same with Nolte. Sometimes you had to maybe dial him in the other way, but I don't know if there's a right or wrong way.
It might be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think and again, maybe that's what made Spencer really, really good. And on the other side, that's what made Jason really, really good, and good at the positions that he is. So yeah, the center.
Yeah. And textbook wise, is there a right? What's the right way? I mean, is textbook Nolte more the mentality more like the textbook way, or?
Yeah. So no, not really. I mean, Jody's answer really is kind of the textbook way. The way I would kind of maybe say the same thing a different way is there are foundational principles that are right and wrong, right? But what really good coaches do, what really do mental conditioning coaches do, and ultimately what really good athletes do, is they make it their own, right? And they find a way to take it work. And you can think of like, it's kind of a wrestling group here, probably a wrestling audience in some sense. So like you can think of a relatively basic move, high crotch, double leg, saying whatever it is, and there's how many different ways to set it up and how many different ways to execute it and finish it, right? And so that would be kind of the analogy I would draw from a wrestling standpoint to this from a mindset standpoint. Like, look, at the end of the day, the ability for a Spencer Lee to go in this direction with how he handles it, and a Jason Nolte to go in this direction with how he handles this topic is, I would guess, I've never met either of them, so I don't know. So correct me if I'm wrong here, Jody, but I would guess their foundational principles are probably pretty similar. Things like character, effort, attitude. I'll bet that stuff, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Jody, but I'll bet that stuff is the same. And then what really, really good coaches do, which Jody, you are that, is they allow people to go take that and then be yourself, right? It's kind of an old school mentality. We were talking about, old school coach before we started recording, and like, to be like, this is the way we do it, right? I'm going to break you down and this is the model. And maybe when we were kids, we had coaches like that, right? But what has happened today, what has allowed performance to jump levels, and we look at the elite levels, right? And you look at our Olympic team, right? You have guys like a Spencer Lee that might have a certain, more hardcore committed mentality than you could see guys like a Kyle Dake that clearly are, have a different way of doing things. And he's pretty regarded as that. And so I think our ability as coaches, as parents, as support systems for elite athletes is like, these are the things that are the non-negotiables if you want to be elite, right? But then if you get to a certain level where once you've taught those things like, how do you not be overcome by the outcomes versus the process? How do you do these other things, right? Your creativity, et cetera, like a Jason Nolte, your example, I think, Jody, how do you allow athletes to make those things their own? That's what helps people become really elite. Now, that's where I think the difference is for every single person. And that is the really big challenge for coaches and parents.
All right. So if you were to, Jody, if you were to kind of create the best parent, okay, for an athlete, what is it? Is it the standoff and, not really get too involved? Do you find that the better athletes have more involved dads? What's too involved? Is there kind of like a right answer for that? Screaming in the corner, obviously not a good thing, right?
No doubt. Yeah. And there's again, a couple, like we just talked about, non-negotiables, like that you can't do. Right. But the cool thing, again, we just finished our 21st year, and we've had so many good kids come up through, and a lot of them, they were really good wrestlers before they came into the club, and then they come in. But you see a lot of different ways that the dads and the moms handle it. So it's really, really cool. I think the one thing that that a lot of our dads have is they are strict in a good way. They're strict. They push, but I guess the one way is that you describe it as you dangle that carrot out in front. You know, I always say if there's two dads and one makes their kid get up and do 300 pull-ups before school, and like that kid every time is like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. And then one dad is like, hey, you want to do pull-ups together? And like goes down there and like, even if they're not doing the pull-ups with them, but they're like having fun with their son and encouraging them and like, man, you look really strong today. I think that, you know, one does 300 pull-ups, the other one does 300 pull-ups. The one that does it the wrong way, does he ever get successful? He's going to struggle. You know, he hates it. Where the other one, you know, he develops a love for working out or trying to be great, and he gets really, really good. So that's a great question. We've had a lot of different approaches, and then also like push young, and then when to back off, when to kind of let that, you know, the son or the daughter take over and like it's their career. But I think at a young age, you know, I hear a lot also the other way is like, oh, my son, he didn't want to go to practice today. Well, you know, did he want to go to school today?
Did he want to brush his teeth? Right.
Yeah. Did he want to get up and go to church on Sunday morning with your family? Like, it's just something we do as a family. It's, hey, we're going to go to practice. You know, we're going to enjoy it. We're going to have fun on the way. We're going to work hard. We're going to have fun on the way back. We're going to stop, whatever, get ice cream or whatever it is. Like, this is what we do. Like, we're going to work hard. So I think that there's so many different ways and approaches. And even again, it's cool for me as a coach, I get to coach the kids, but I've also got to sit back in 21 years and kind of process and see, you know, how the mom and dads are kind of treating their kids and how that's worked out short term. And then most importantly for our club and the kids and my own kids, like long term.
Yeah. And the, what textbook wise, I mean, is it the more standoff? Because what I've noticed, okay, so, you know, again, what I bring to this conversation is like, I never wrestled. I played sports, but not at a high level. You know, so I'm figuring this thing out, you know, but I think also, I've also noticed a lot of like successful wrestling kids, and I'm sure it's in other sports too, didn't have, you know, the dads that were in the sport. And what I've kind of registered from that is that I go into this not knowing anything, right? I know zero about this. So I'm asking the questions. You know, I'm reaching out because I reached out to Jody. I mean, I didn't run into him. I just reached out, hey, would you be able to come to Miami? You know, and then I'm picking your brain, and you know, in your case, you know, we connected through a weird way, right? But you know, I'm always picking your brain on stuff, so we're always learning, right? Like we're always, I'm open to learn every single thing to become the best. If I look at myself as a wrestling dad, and even with my daughter with the tennis, the first tournaments, I think the second tournament I went to her tennis wise, I got thrown out. So. You know, if I look at myself back then, I'm embarrassed of myself. I'm embarrassed of myself. There was one story, Elijah was like 5, and we had one of the dads has like FU written on his knuckles, gold teeth. Amazing guy though, amazing guy. But he looks like, you know, way rougher around the, I'm probably rougher, but he's rougher on the edges. And I'm screaming to my son, I'm screaming, rip his head off in Spanish. I'm gonna rip his head off. And he's like, hey, dude, you can't say that. I'm like, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. So if I look back, I'm embarrassed of what I was when I first started, but you start learning and you start seeing, you know, what happens and everything like that. So, but textbook, who is the perfect dad? Super involved, not involved, somewhere in the middle?
Yeah. I would think, and Jody, you probably dealt with this a lot and having parents ask you, you know, questions as a coach for so many years. But one of the things that is frustrating to my clients, what is frustrating to me as I try to answer this question is it's a undisputable fact that every kid is different. And what works for this kid is not going to necessarily work for this kid, right? Even more frustrating, I have 2 kids. So what works for one of my kids might not work for the other one of my own kids. Same parents, same DNA, same home.
I've seen that happen too. Right. Completely different.
So, you know, so then if we can accept that, right, assuming we agree that like every kid is different, so there isn't going to be this, here's your answer, right? Here's your 1, 2, 3 process. Follow step A, step B, step C, and then your kid will be successful, because that's what we want, right? And as the world evolves and gets speeds up, social media, whatever it is, instant gratification, all these things, and people are like, just give me the answer, right? Let me skip to the end. right? The answer becomes, well, you have a process, you have a journey, and it's going to be different every time. So, but I'm not giving you a non-answer. Here's what I would
And both
say.
of you kind of give me a non-answer. So
Well,
I'm going to go back and I'm going to ask you again. Right?
But
okay, give me the absolutely don't do's. Because what I want to get from this, what I want to get from this video is that there's a dad like I was, you know, when I first started, and he could watch this and be like, oh, okay, don't do this. Don't do this. How do we better, thank you. How do we better the sport, you know, with this interview? So what do you think for sure?
And by the way, that's one of the big frustrations sometimes with like a sports psychology profession. And my mentor, Greg Shelley, was always so great about identifying the difference between kind of research and applied sports psychology. And I think he is one of the best in the world at the latter, the applied. That's why he's so helpful to athletes. And so
he's at Cornell now?
Yes.
With Cornell wrestling?
Well, he's the senior director of sports leadership and mental conditioning at Cornell University Athletics.
Okay.
So, but the wrestling team is on that. So, but he, and I think he's an Iowa guy actually too, Jody. So you'd like him. But, the reason I bring that up is your response is appropriate, right? It's like, look, okay, great. If I accept that, like, how does that help me? What do I do? And I think in your story is one of the most important responses. That's like, look, the common denominator on coaches or parents that are helping that wrestling dad or mom that's watching this is like, okay, what do I do? Well, what you have to do is have a willingness to learn. You have to have a willingness to be aware and change and say, okay, I did something at the beginning of my kid's career that I recognized wasn't better. You want to constantly reach out. Like myself example, I wrestled. My dad was a wrestler. Okay. I coached wrestling for a very, very long time. And then I got a degree in sport and performance psychology. So there is a possibility that somebody with that kind of back of their baseball card is like, I don't need any help, right? I got it. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to help my son be successful. So that would be my answer to you is like, that's the worst thing you can do. Elite mindsets, whether it's as a parent or a business professional, an athlete, whatever it is, one of the common denominators is they're trying to evolve and get better every day. So what I would say to that wrestling dad is if you're doing the same things in a year that you're doing now, you're probably not doing what's best for your kid. So like, go learn, go.
Okay, but let's talk about screaming during a match. Do it, don't do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say definitely don't do it. I guess if you're trying to get your son's attention, like yelling and then calmly, you know, but if it's just screaming it, yeah, it's not helping for sure.
Right. So the most famous get up, right? When they're up bottom, you know, so, I mean, no. So if it's not technical instruction, it does absolutely no good and mostly harm. Is that fair to say?
I think it depends. That's always going to be kind of the qualifier, but like, look, here's what I would say. Screaming in general, it comes back to kind of the messenger of the message, right? First of all, you a coach. Like, are you Jody coaching his son and he's a coach? Well, you probably have to scream a couple of times, right? Because he has to hear you because he's wrestling and he's a headgear on. There's hundreds of people watching. So it's not that like screaming is bad, but it's more like, what are you screaming? Like your point, get up, right? This is one of my things. Like every sport has their equivalents. Like baseball, I've always told this story, like the third base coach, like, be a hitter. What do you think the kid is trying to do? Like yell something helpful, right? So it's screaming, you know, I don't know, it depends on the kid, but what are you screaming and why are you screaming it, right? That would be the kinds of things I would say that parents need to be evaluating, right? You might have a kid, like, this isn't my son, he's only 5, so I haven't had this really experience yet, but like I've had kids I've coached that have been like, hey coach, I don't want you to yell at me during the match. I can't hear you. It kind of just distracts me. And like, okay, so the lesson is 1, open up that communication with your son or athlete so that they can tell you what they want, empower them to tell you what they want, and then listen. But you might also have ones like, yo, I need you to get after me during a match because it motivates me.
Okay.
So I think that it's really.
You've seen that too, Jody? Kind of both?
Yeah.
Some kids don't want it and some kids need it?
I think the age level is very important for me as a coach. Like, so my son is 8, 7 last year we competed and stuff. So trying to help him through a match sometimes, is maybe more important, but I don't know. The way I look at it is like, if I'm yelling technical things in a match, I haven't done my job as a coach in practice.
Okay. That's awesome. Good point.
You got to coach during practice. Out there, they have to learn, and to think from themselves. And if you're always yelling instructions, typically you're a second behind already anyway. So I'll yell, things like, hey, keep believing yourself. Like, hey, you can do this. Like that.
So positive, you're gonna yell anything, I guess the message would be, if you're not yelling positive stuff, just kind of
100%.
shut up a little bit, right? Like, just, you're there to support them. You're there to if they need a little bit of a wind in their sails, you're the wind in their sails. Maybe you're like, hey, wake up, you're a little, something like that.
I think positive is important, but you also touched on one of your questions, like, what are the don'ts? Like, one of the other big don'ts I see is like, don't make it about you, right? I've seen a lot of clients and parents who are clearly living their dreams, desires, trying to fix their failures, whatever it is, through their child. And that is definitely one of the don'ts that people need to be self-aware on. And I was just thinking, listen to both of you and Jody, it's like, look, that kid's the wrestler, right? So you're not helping them by putting whatever you're bringing to the table on. And look, you run a club, we've all seen wrestling dads are kind of notorious for this, right? Like, wrestling's a tough sport. There's one champ, right? Yeah. 10 weight classes if you're talking college, right? So like, there's mostly people who lost if you're in this sport. You've been in the sport, right?
Majority, yeah.
And my father, right? My father wrestled. You bring up wrestling. He wrestled at Blair. He wrestled at Cornell. He will tell you about this national semifinals loss he had in high school and how he still can't sleep. And he's about to, and he's in his 70s, right? So like, this is the wrestling dad culture. And that is definitely one of the don'ts. Realize, like, you want to foster a love of the sport, kind of like Jody's story a few minutes ago about the early morning pull-ups. Like, you want them to have fun. So, it gave you kind of more direct, like, what do we do type things. You want to make sure that they have something sustainable that you can build hard work, because they're going to have to work really, really hard if they're going to be successful at this. And by the way, that goes for anything in life. So you got to really kind of help them enjoy it. And if you're screaming at them, right? Who likes being screamed at? And I think that that's, definitely one of the things that parents, dads in particular, want to be aware of is like, okay, this is what I wish I did. I wish I could go, and I'll speak for myself. Like, I wish I could go back in time, work harder, be more committed, have higher character during my middle school, high school years, and then see what I could have been.
Right.
If I bring that to either of my kids, I'm setting them up for failure because I'm putting myself on.
Yeah. And the pushing the kid is interesting too. Cause, my dad was an amazing father. Right. Like, this is nowhere near a complaint. Still my best friend. Coached all my little league basketball games. He didn't know shit about basketball. Looking back now, he had no business coaching any of those games. He knew absolutely nothing about, about coaching, but he just wanted to be there, wanted to be my coach of the whole situation. But my dad never really pushed me at all.
It's awesome.
I pushed myself, right? Pushed myself to be the best. Man, I was obsessed with it, the whole situation. But he's watching now, like, what I'm doing with my kids, and he came up to me the other day. He's like, "Man, you know what? Like, I wish I would have pushed you more. I wish I would have known what I know now and what I'm seeing you do now. I think it would have made a big difference in your life and the whole situation." I'm like, "Yeah, dude. You didn't know." He's like, "No, I really didn't." Like, he's talking to me like just regular conversation. Like, "No, I had no idea." That this world of, like, expecting the best from your kid, giving them all the tools to succeed. And I just came from Cuba. I'm just worried about putting food on the table. It's like he had no idea. So that really kind of registered with me more. Like, I was like, man, you know what? It's kind of like, it's almost my responsibility as a father to push with not push. And here's where it gets interesting, right? Like, pushing with it positively, right? Like, don't put too much pressure, but give all the tools. So I guess really I kind of answered it to myself. So it's not really pushing. It's really, hey, give all the tools, give positive reinforcement.
And model. I mean, I would say, I don't know your dad, but I would challenge him a little bit in that comment to say, I'll bet coming from Cuba, being worried about putting food on the table and yeah, you had some hard work. Sure. You had some high character and that's what, as parents and as coaches, we need to think a lot about. Like, we're saying so much with so much more than just what we're saying with our words. Yeah. So just because he might not have done some of the things you're doing for your kids doesn't mean he didn't lay out for you.
He gave me an example of hard work. Yeah.
This is a blueprint you can follow.
But it didn't really register at that age, right? I was, again, kids are born different. I was always born with really, as a kid, I always wanted to be rich, and I always wanted, it was all like, I want to be successful. It was just born inside of me, right? So not everybody's like that, and some people need to be pushed, and I'm assuming it's the same thing with athletics. Mm-hmm. So here's another very controversial subject in the sport or in any sport, right? And you hear it all the time from parents. Hey, it doesn't matter if you win 6U, 8U, 10U, 12U, whatever. A college coach is not going to care if you won Tulsa Nationals, the whole situation. Now, here's the problem. I read, and Will Bassett is not a poet or an author, but he wrote a hell of an article. Did you read that article that he wrote on that?
Absolutely, yeah. We talk about this stuff all the time. Yep.
Yeah, so I'll bring you up to date on that article. He's like, man, I don't really believe that whole, well, it doesn't matter. Oh, you read it? Yeah. Right. So it's like, so I'll bring the audience in on it. So this gentleman, arguably one of the most successful dads, out there, definitely one of them, and he basically mentions, well, why doesn't it matter if they win in 6U or 8U or 10U just because a college coach? So are you telling him, hey, get bad grades in elementary? A college recruit, a college admissions is not going to care if you got a C in third grade or fourth grade or whatever. So why lower the standards onto it doesn't really matter, right? So that kind of reprogrammed my brain a little bit, like, wait a second, so I would love your guys' take on that, like where is, and again, I've talked to you enough about the sports psychology part where you kind of want to take that pressure off, right? But how much of that pressure do you take off, right? Mm-hmm. So it's yeah. So if you could kind of elaborate on that.
I'll try to go quick and see what Jody thinks about this, but and maybe add some other things. But look, at the end of the day, on this topic of like a 6U Tulsa, right? Like my 5-year-old won a state title, right? Like, is he going to get a Division I scholarship out of that? Unlikely. Not, so it's the balance that we're looking for is you want them to have some success and you want them to have some fun. It's fun to win. Like, right. And it's okay to say that out loud. And there is so much of this surrendering the result. And that the good part of that is releasing the pressure. I'm happy to talk more about that. But what we have to balance on is, I think that article brings up a good point when making the connection to grades, right? Like we want them to learn the right way to do things.
I think there are habits, rewards, right? Creating strong habits. Winning habits. Is really what he said. Winning habits is winning habits. What he said, right?
And that's what I think. Look, you can't. It's not fair or realistic to say to an athlete, create these winning habits for a decade as a child who just wants dessert today, right? That's the way their brains work. But the reward is out there in a decade in a Division I scholarship, which most of these parents are really thinking about when it comes down to like, what's the number one goal for the parents? Yes, they want their kids to be successful and happy, but like ultimately they're trying to get their kid to the next level. And that's not wrong. But so I think what it becomes down to is a balance of like, look, you need to have enough success that it's fun, which can be a 6U, 8U Tulsa win. But you also need to experience enough failure, right? Sure. Jody's point, like in practice, if you're coming in and you're not losing in practice, but you also need to learn one of those winning habits is you need to challenge yourself, which means you need to seek out failure because that's how you push your limits. So I think there's a real balance going on around, as parents, you want them to be having some fun and some success. It's part of long-term motivation. It's part of creating genuine, sustainable enjoyment. And then you also want to put things in perspective, right? You're not the king of the world because you won 6U Tulsa. And right. That's what I think we're looking for. I mean, I can go forever on that, but Jody, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I guess as a wrestling coach, that's my job to help them find success, so that if I'm going to say it's not important, then what am I doing as a coach? Right.
Why am I here? Right.
Yeah. I have to help them, kind of find success and winning is a part of that. However, you go like to the 6U or even 8U, and if it's all about winning, that's where the problem comes in. So I always want our kids in the ball game. Hey, if you're in that quarterfinal match, if you're, in that ball game, you're doing we talked about there's only one champ. So if it's only, hey, you got second and you're horrible at 6U, that's not going to go very far. If it's all about winning again, and you don't let your kid eat for, 2 weeks straight, and now every single practice is about a number on a scale. It's not, did you get better at finishing? It's not, did you get better at getting off the bottom? It's a number on the scale. That's all the practice is about. What did you weigh at? You know, what did you weigh in the morning? It's not about getting a morning workout, you know, before school. It's all about, what did you weigh this morning? That's where the trouble comes in. So whenever it's only about first place, you know, and even placing at some of those tournaments, like that's where the trouble comes in. Like, so some kids, they cut so much weight that by the time they're in high school, they don't want to cut weight anymore. They hate that process of the sport. They hate that part of it. And then it's important maybe to do it more, you know, smarter, but more. And by that time, you know, young kids have eating disorders, you know, with wrestling. So yeah, it's again, it's like everything we've talked about this morning. So it's so cool to talk about this stuff because every single kid, you know, is different. They all go about it different ways. But I'll tell you what, 99% of the kids, you know, they hate cutting weight. And if you do it too much early, you know, it hurts them later.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was one of the questions too. So what's like the psychological part? Because what I've also noticed, what I've seen is that these heavy cutters, right, that depend on cutting to win, if there's ever a circumstance where they can't cut, it's almost like they psychologically, they put themselves like, well, I'm not cutting, I can't win. And I've seen some parents say, shit like, well, he can't cut this much weight, so we're not going to compete, right?
Right.
I'm like, so wait a second. So if he's not cutting 10, 15 pounds, you won't even take him to the tournament.
Right.
Like, what does that put in the kid's head? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's one question in there I want to come back to ask Jody in a bit, but I wrote it down, I won't forget it. But to answer your question, look, from the mindset standpoint, there's a couple of things there I worry about. First is on the weight cutting topic, just like, look, this is part of the fabric of our sport. I think our sport's evolving and dealing with it, you know, as best it can. But like at the end of the day, for younger kids, if our goal is to, you know, teach them some principles and have them have long-term sustainability, which requires some fun and enjoyment, I would worry, you know, and I've been a youth coach, like I worry about, okay, we're cutting weight. Like there is, but then there's a time where like it is part of the sport as you get older. And so the balance becomes, again, every kid's different, but like, when do you introduce it? How much do you introduce it? So that's one of my concerns. But the other is, you know, what you're bringing up, which gets to a couple different things. One is, you know, shielding our kids from failure is one of, to your point, like, hey, what are some don'ts? Don't do that, right? Whether it's weight cutting or, hey, we want to qualify for the state tournament. This qualifier is easier and this qualifier. Like I've had that conversation with parents, whether as a coach or a you know, mental conditioning coach. And I'm like, what are you teaching your kid for life? But like, we're going to go take the easier track here. So, so that kind of ties into that. But at the end of the day, if your success is tied to something other than your ability to perform,
work hard,
right? That's going
to
have a direct, you know, you keep asking like, what's the textbook? That's going to have a direct negative impact on your confidence because now it's not about my performance. It's not about the things I can control, right? It's about how much do I weigh or how much does my opponent weigh?
Yeah, and I think it goes the other way too, right? Like you have a kid who's really, really struggling and maybe they don't love the sport anymore and taking them a couple weeks in a row where they can find success and they can win a big trophy and like, so it's cool. Like navigating through everyone's career. Some kids get it really, really good early. Some kids like it really struggles. And we've had that, you know, we've had a kid who never placed at the Pennsylvania Youth State Tournament as a youth, never placed. And then by his senior year, he was a Pennsylvania most outstanding wrestler.
Wow.
Got a scholarship to Iowa. So it's crazy how that works. Like,
Max Murin, we should shout him out, right?
Yeah, they get it. They get it.
Yeah.
And they start working, and it just doesn't click, you know, and then they start becoming all in and, you know, have so much success later. So everyone's different kind of.
Yeah. And it leads me to my other question, right? So I think it was a 60 Minutes piece on, it was an African-American hockey player, right? They're interviewing the dad and he said one thing that, I mean, that must've been 10 years ago that I saw that. And it always stuck with me, right? He's like, you know, I pushed my son and I pushed my son and I pushed my son. And it was my dream until, and I always told him it was my dream until one day it had to be his dream, right? There has to be a day where hey man, you know, and I talk to my son all the time, like, hey man, it's coming close to the point where, you know, it's not about daddy pushing you. It's about you you know, and luckily we are making that transition, you know, and everything like that. But that was one thing that really scared me. I'm like, because I see a lot of kids drop off during puberty and stuff, and he's not there yet as far as the puberty is concerned. But, and that's where, you know, and I wonder if there's like a whole thing about that. But, you know, yeah, there's a point where we have to, if we're doing it right, and tell me if I'm crazy, right? If we're doing it right, we got to kind of completely step away. And is there an age for that you see, or is everybody different, or and I'm sure everybody is different.
Yeah,
like a textbook rule on that. Like,
there's not. It is already, but you're spot on, and it's very similar to Jody's comment a few minutes ago about how, you know, if you've done your job when they're performing, right, you're just watching, right? Like Coach K has a great Duke basketball coach has a great quote about this, that if we've done our job come tournament time, we're spectators, right? And that would be kind of my answer to you is like, parents, look, yes, everybody's different. That's going to be the answer to a lot of these things. And that can be sometimes frustrating. But the reality is if you've done your job at some point in their journey, right? Like no athlete's going to go be elite if their mom or dad is the main source of their motivation. Eventually they have to take ownership of their craft.
Right.
When and where?
Usually after puberty, usually. No,
oh, no, I'll bet. I mean, I would guess. I never met Spencer Lee, but he looks to me like the kind of guy who probably showed up owning it, wanting it, you know, but at some point his parents introduced him to sports. I mean, what do you think, Jody?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I guess, generally say I see it around middle school, just because that's where kids, you know, they start taking interest in girls, and they start coming, you know, like drugs, alcohol, more introduced in their life at school. So that's where I see a big change. Like if kids, like, they could be really good, you know, young, and then, you know, they get to middle school and it, like, they take different paths. Like, and that's what I say about Spencer all the time. Like, he has stayed on path. Like, he has said from the youngest age that I met him, like, I want to be an Olympian. You know, I want to be a gold medalist. Right. And I know he didn't achieve that. But he has never got off path with a girl, with a party, with drugs, with alcohol, with an injury. Every time he got, boom, like, he got hurt, back on, you know. So, and you see that so many times. And Mike Nolte told me, this is Jason's father, one time, he was like, Jody, I knew it was time to step away. You know, when he was in middle school, he's like, I sat on the side and I would just micromanage everything he did. You know, it didn't matter how much good he did, you know. And he's like, I realized that one day, you know, and he's like, I knew I had to step away, and it's his career. And like, from then I just dropped him off. I'd go get something to eat. I wouldn't come in practice, you know. And then, you know, on the way home, how'd you do? And this is another awesome piece of advice I got. You know, 2 minutes of practice, you know, you get in a car, 2 minutes, how'd it go? Or, hey, you need to work on this or that, and then nothing else. So no kid wants to go to practice, the whole practice, you know, and putting their heart and soul in it. And then the whole way home get, you know, micromanage of everything that they could have done better. You know, they don't want to go to practice, and your relationship kind of changes with them. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
So kind of back to that topic and the little bit of like having success later and the fun of winning a little bit, Jody. You've actually shared with me something that I think Jody told you, but I want to ask you the question. So in the world of sports psychology, right, extrinsic rewards or sort of things, right? Like it's like a medal.
Question, but yeah,
okay, good. All right, so it's like a medal, right? Or you know, the cake or the chocolate or the ice cream or whatever it is, right? And when you're studying motivation, you learn like an extrinsic reward is not something that's going to be like long-term sustainable. Now, the younger your kids go, and this is something that I didn't learn in grad school, something I learned as a parent, as a dad, right? Like you better use those extrinsic rewards because you're going to get your kids to do stuff, right? So I'm curious what you would have to say kind of on this topic and something that we've just been talking about. Like, I would have said, as coming out of grad school, like straight letter of the law, sports psych stuff, if I was advising myself as a dad, right? Like, no, make it about things that are 100% within your control and control the controllables and these principles. And like, that's the way to build a champion, right? But then look, very first wrestling tournament my son ever went to, which was last season, he got beaten around robin. There's 4 kids in it. And he was like freaking out. And he was like, I'm not wrestling anymore. I'm never wrestling. I was like, hey, bud, you know, you win this next one, you get a medal. And he was like, what? Like, I get a what? He didn't care what color it was. Right. You know, he was 4 years old at the time. And he just was like, that's awesome. And that was when we had that conversation. So Jody, like, I'm just curious how you've seen that, because there's clearly a balance that we need to find as coaches and parents where it's like, look, he had so much fun winning that medal.
Yeah, and they call it as a negative, right? And I've had, like, onto your conversation, like I've had a specific conversation with Jody about this, like what they call it trophy hunting, right? And whether it's a negative or a positive. And the way it came up that, Jody was at my house, and, I have Elijah's, like, Tulsa Eagles and everything. And he was, showing his son and everything like that. I'm like, kind of stepped Jody aside. I'm, Jody, what do you think about that, man? Like, what this whole thing, and you're pushing, because when Elijah first started in the sport, he hated wrestling the first 6 months. He cried the entire 6 months. And to a point where I'm like, dude, this is not for him. Like, but I also realized, at least smart enough to realize the sport kind of sucks. Like, it's a hard sport.
It's hard.
Not everybody's going to like it at the beginning. So that reward was, after every practice, was a little car, like a little Hot Wheels car. So I would buy a bunch of them, and then, hey, if you don't cry at practice, or if you do this or you do that, I'll get you a little car. I mean, my son had an iPhone at 6 years old, because I was like, well, if you beat this kid at practice, right? Just wanted to get him, because there was some kid who was really beating his ass at practice, like one of those practice bullies. And I'm like, if you beat this kid, I'll get you a phone. He's like, really? Dude, I didn't think ever that was going to.
Once you said it, you got to do it.
Absolutely impossible it was going to happen, right? And it did happen, and I had to get him the phone. You know what I mean? So it was a horrible thing, because I have a 6-year-old with a phone, but I got him through that hump. So yeah, the Jody, I guess if you could elaborate on the trophy hunting, and how much of that is recommended and not, and because it serves as motive. Okay, I'll let you answer, because go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I think the answer is, like, to me, there is no real answer. Like, again, like, some kids, like, for example, my son, he went to your house, and now, like, it's in his mind that he wants an eagle in the worst way. So is that a bad thing? No, I think that's an awesome thing. Now if it's me saying, like, over and over and over that I want an eagle for him,
right.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I do think that it's really, really cool. And I think that's, sometimes, like, kids will play football all season long, and football is a really, really fun sport. But I know that we get a lot of kids that come to wrestling, from football, and they're like, wait, you can, because football, you'll play all season long, and you win.
Maybe get a trophy, yeah.
And at the end, you may have a sports, banquet or whatever, and they give you a little trophy or a medal. Like, they're like, wait, wrestling, you can get a trophy or a medal every single weekend. You can keep trying, like, and they love that. So I think that's really, really cool, to kind of, like, keep pushing them, and again, keep dangling that carrot in front of them, so,
yeah.
And yeah, it's the same way. If it's, hey, if you win this tournament, I'll buy you this. That's where it gets to be tricky, because now it becomes all about winning and losing at a young age. And that's where you sometimes, like, a dad will get so mad at their kid who just wrestled incredible, and maybe they don't know even how good the kid is, but they lost, and it's, you got to work harder. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then they win, and they don't do anything. They score 1 point, and they kind of stall and take injury time and all the bad things, but they won, and everyone's showering them with love. Grandma's over there. You won, So when it's only about winning and losing, again, we talked about this earlier, it gets to be tricky there. But
how about so again, there's always a carrot, and there's always has to be motivation to move forward. And what I've learned from both of you guys in reality has been, hey, it really doesn't matter every tournament is really a preparation for the next tournament, right? So if you go to VAC, and it might be, Super 32 or Super 32 first, whatever. So don't look at the results on that one. Look at it as preparation for the next one, right? So, and that's really why I like duels, right? So whoever's not, a wrestling a parent, duels is where, these teams, you get picked for an Ohio team, or you get picked for a Pennsylvania team, and you meet somewhere, and then this team it's really an all-star team versus all-star team, right? And you compete against other teams. But the reason why I like it, and that's kind of where my next question is it takes away the first place, second place, third place thing. It's more like, hey, who do I have in my bracket that I'm going to wrestle? So it transfers the I'm going to win at first place, second, third place to I'm going to wrestle this kid, and I want to beat this kid. So, if you could talk a little bit about that, like, so you're transferring the energy towards, not trophy hunting, but let's go after the best kids, right? Like, hey man, and writing, and I know we've done that in my house. I've done it with my daughter. I've done it with my son. There's people's names on our wall, and we've scratched out a bunch of them, right? And there's a bunch of them that have not been scratched out. You know what I mean? So that I think is, again, from the novice, from just following my gut, that's the healthiest way, right? Like, let's go after the best kids. Like, and look, I've had it where we go after that best kid and he gets his ass kicked. And then the next time it's like, 2 points away. And then the next time he beats him, or he loses by 1 to a kid that he's not even, it's off the charts. But so, how does that work, Jody? Like, is that something you do also? Are we chasing, chasing lions or chasing kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, my kids are young enough that maybe we haven't gotten into that. It's really, really young and pure to their age. Like, it's just about getting better. And they put in an amazing summer. And again, this is going to sound so cheesy, but like, they have so many resources here, just in the state, and the coaches that, or the kids that I've coached, they're surrounded with so many good people that I just truly want them to love it. And if they do, that means they're going to come to practice every day with a smile on their face, and they're going to get so much better. Like, so I don't know. The duels is tricky for me, and I'll be honest, I can't stand duels. I hate them. And
why?
This is too, because I think that kids, hey, you lose the first match. And again, now this is more older. Okay. So this is older. You lose the first match. It's okay. Well, guess what? It's not okay. You didn't warm up the right way. You didn't prepare. You didn't eat right after weigh-ins. And now you're in the Conti bracket. So you can't be a world team member. You're in the Conti, you didn't do things right. Where duels is like, oh, don't worry. You get back there, get there next, So at a young age, I think it's really valuable. And then I put duels together for years and years and years, and they're hard, right? So I have a bad taste in my mouth of, we're putting duels and then someone gets sick the first or the next.
As an organizer, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
hard.
an absolute nightmare.
They're hard.
Yeah.
They are fun to do. There's a lot of value in them, but as you get older, they're tricky, because sometimes you can not do well, and it's just like, oh, next time. And I've seen that a lot from some of our kids. Like, they'll go to duels and they'll go 7-2. They'll lose the first 2, and then they'll get on a roll. Well, sorry, you're in the contests. You got to be ready from the first one in an individual tournament. So I think going both ways is important. But
so you're saying it takes off the most important pressure that you need for the individual, basically?
That learning. Yeah, that learning is important. So that pressure, again, at a young age is good, to take that pressure.
That's like
off.
everything else. It's a balance, right? It's a balance.
100%. I think that's cool. Like, we've talked for an hour, and it's so cool. I could talk for 12 more hours and listen, and learn too. But I think it's just such a feel, and just treating kids good, loving them, if they win, if they lose, love them. And, how do we get better? Next step, how do we get better? Do we got to get stronger? Do we got to get more flexible? Do we got to get better at bottom? Like, what's the next thing? So, and that's really the to me, like, can you grind? Can you grind day after day?
Falling in love with how hard this sport is. And that's one thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen both my kids, man, because my daughter, I don't want to, I mean, they're practicing in the sun. Like, I was talking yesterday on, if people really knew what these kids put into it, the stuff that they sacrifice, the events, the birthday parties, the normal life, right, that they miss, right? Look, I always say, don't feel too bad for them, because they're traveling the country and they're with their buddies, and like, let's not get carried away either. You know what I mean? So, and in my kids, example, I mean, he's with all his friends, and we really go out of our way to make sure that, and my buddy Bachman, which, same thing as Bassett, I consider him one of the most successful, like, wrestling dads, right? Sure. I mean, both of his kids, the Bachman brothers, are in Amman, Jordan right now, competing at Worlds, right? And he's always big on, and he's probably gonna hate that I'm bringing him up. He's the behind the scenes guy. He doesn't like to be talked about, but he's work hard, play hard, man. And we always, as a group, and our group is a lot of Florida, a lot of Pennsylvania guys. We always get together all around the country and stuff, and it's like, and we got to make sure the kids are having fun. Yeah. And I think that that's a big thing in any sport. I got that really early. And the reason why, Miami Wrestling Club even exists is because I understood that. I understood that I need to be since I don't know wrestling, I don't know anything. One thing I do know is how to get people together and recruit and that type of stuff. And I needed to make sure I recruited the best kids to be around my best, not best wrestlers, best kids, right?
Yeah.
Be around good people, be around a healthy environment. If there's and another reason why the club exists is I wanted to have the ability to get rid of it. There's a bad apple, and that's another thing. But what I could add to that, feeding off on Bachman is always saying it, work hard, play hard, is that, I go out of my way to make sure that when we go to a tournament, right, we leave some time for fun, right? And Jody, we've had some of that together. We've been, on the boat, and we've been, hanging out and stuff like that. So that's a big, big, big deal for us. You know what I mean? And even that we just did a camp right now. And we did all the work in the morning, and the rest of the day, the kids were on the beach, they were fishing, there were a whole situation, right? So who you surround yourself by in any sport, I think it's extremely important, right? If there's one bad kid that doesn't want to be there, right? That's another thing. So if there's, 5 teammates, 10 teammates, and one of them doesn't want to be there, and it's always, the negative and this and that, that's a bad thing. Right? I don't even have to ask you that. I mean, that's a bad thing. And just making sure that you find the fun in it. Don't make it a job. Don't make it. Yes, you have to work because life is work, and life is like you said a little while ago. Winning, or you said winning is fun, right? And people ask me all the time, "Oh, do your kids like the sport?" I'm like, yeah, but you kind of like anything you win in, right? I mean, you could be pencil fighting, you know what I mean? A lot of youngsters don't know what pencil fighting is, but pencil fighting was a big thing in our day, right? Did they have pencil fighting in Pennsylvania back in the days, like where you snap the pencil and you break? You didn't have that up there?
We didn't have that in Jersey.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah, you get a pencil.
The Miami thing.
You snap the pencil, and the pencil snaps in half, and you win. But yeah, if whatever you're good at, you're gonna be, you're gonna love, So I kind of touched up on what I considered on both of my kids, the most difficult stage period, right? The beginning, right? That very, very beginning. If we're talking to somebody right now that has, and I get calls all the time because it's my number on the Instagram, and it's all, so I get people all the time. Hey, my kid is,
they're calling right now.
Yeah. My kid is, 3 years old, 4 years old, right? And he wants to, start wrestling or whatever, right? So I can tell you my experience, both of my kids, I don't know you guys being so much around the sport that it might have been a little different, but neither one of my kids wanted to play their sport at the beginning. And they all played different sports, soccer, this and that, you know what I mean? So, but, I go back to a funny interview. So I saw, and I would joke around with my kids about this. Like there was a Johnny Hendricks. Remember Johnny Hendricks back in the days? So they interviewed his dad, and his dad is like a real, country accent. And he's like, yeah, I told Johnny, they're asking him like, hey, how'd you get him into the sport? He goes, oh, I told Johnny real early in life, he had 2 choices. He's either going to wrestle or he's going to wrestle. Right. So and I would joke around about that. I'm like, you got 2 choices. You got tennis, So, but that being said, my wife played tennis her whole life. So my daughter really had that, tennis or tennis. There was really 2 choices for her. Right. In my case, we started wrestling because of jiu-jitsu, but the whole point is this: neither one of them really liked the sport at the beginning. Right. So would I be giving unhealthy advice? Right. Not being a sports psychologist, not being, a legendary coach, saying, kind of force them until they like it, is that, because it kind of worked for both of my kids. Now they're both madly in love with the sport. It's who they are. It's what they love. It's what they do, but yeah, they both cried. I mean, Elijah worse. My son cried 6 months straight. I mean, it got to the point where I called my dad. I'm like, dude, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do this anymore. He would fucking ask me he would ask me in the morning, hey, what are we doing today? And we got wrestling practice, and he would start crying from the morning. and then I would pick him up from school, and he would cry, right, the whole way to practice. And I'm like, and then I call my dad, and I go, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't take it. And there was one day that I hugged him at practice, and I felt his little heart just beating out of his chest. And I'm like, oh my God, why am I torturing my kid? And my dad's like, I get it, but you're too far into it now, right? Like you quit now, you're teaching him to quit, right? And luckily, that kid for the iPhone happened like 2 weeks after, and everything turned around after that. You know, that iPhone got me through everything pretty
Thank you, Steve Jobs. Yeah,
Steve Jobs.
there you go.
But so the question is, is that bad advice saying, hey guys, you know, like, you know, back to the, hey, they brush their teeth, they do this, they do that,
Yeah.
you know, is that healthy, or what do we do to that, man?
I would say it's not bad advice. It's not good advice is what I would say, right? Like,
Yes and no?
yeah, I mean, a lot of these things come down to what I have to say to all parents who hire me, where it's, look, every kid's different. So I don't know until I talk to your kid anything, right? Like, so other than some basic foundational principles. So look, for your kids that worked, right? But also, look, what I would say is, if your kid's crying all the time and they're unhappy, look, you have a choice as a parent. Ultimately, like, that's a God-given choice of, like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Like, as long as you're not doing this harming your child, then okay, fine. But here's what I'm saying. What probably you were also doing at the same time that you may not remember were some things that were having a very positive influence, because it's unlikely that, whether it was that extrinsic reward of the iPhone, it's probably not that. It's probably the time with dad. There's probably other experiences you were having that were fostering some positive feelings for Elijah at the time, right? That you probably like, we always remember the worst part, right? Wrestlers remember their losses, right? So we remember our kid crying, right?
Yeah.
So look, at the end of the day, if your kid hates something, should you make them do it? Depends on the kid.
Well, I saw it as self-defense. I'm like, look, you're going to be a man. You got to, and that's how this whole thing started. I didn't wrestle. So I was like, hey, this is self-defense. You got to be a man. I was thinking, 300 warrior. It is what it is. You're going to fight, that's what my mindset was, so that's what got me kind of through it. And then my dad got me through the final stage of it.
But like, had I known you then, I would have said, like, well, why is he crying? Right? Like,
is he crying every second of it?
Yeah. But what does he hate about it?
Got his ass kicked every day.
Like, well, yeah, but like,
he's the youngest one.
That's right. Like, Bobby goes through that. Right. So it's like, look, the wrestling in the context that we're talking about it, right? Because we're talking about parents trying to get their kids into wrestling, and then it's a vessel for teaching them life skills, right? Like, how many are going to be Spencer Lee, Jason Nolf, some of these names became almost none, right? And if you go into it with that mentality that that's why we're doing it, if that was what you were doing then, I would have told you, stop, like, find something else. But if you were doing it because...
And you would be giving me good advice. If I would have talked to you, luckily I didn't know you back then, right? If I would have talked to you, you would have given me really good advice. To be like, dude, what are you doing? Relax, take it easy, come back in a year, right?
But I would have asked you why you were doing it, right?
But
and if it
probably still would have told me not to do it.
Maybe. But if it was like, look, I want my kid to learn character. I want my kid to learn what commitment looks like. I want my kid to learn that we're not going to get handed anything in life. Everybody wants the corner office. Not everybody wants to work 10 years in a cubicle to get the corner office, right?
Right.
If that's what we're teaching, and those are the conversations that are going crying, like, look, my kids my daughter's in gymnastics, which I think is a sport very similar to wrestling. Right?
Very different.
Wrestling, they're different, but they're similar in that they're individual, very hard, physically challenging, and you are not going to be good if you don't go through some physical pain, build some strength. And look, I think going through that at a young age is good. So if my kids were to come to me, and maybe this is helpful to parents, and Jody, I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say about what I'm about to say, but if my kids at their young ages, right, Jenny comes to me, she's 8, and says, I don't want to do gymnastics anymore. And she's good. She's really good. She's really strong. And, Bobby comes and says, I don't want to wrestle, Dad. I would want to say why. First of all, I would turn and cry. Right. But after that happened, I would want to know why. Is it because you don't like it, or is it because you are trying to get out of hard work? Those are two very different topics to deal with your young child.
But in wrestling, it's like, I see these kids come from football all the time, right? And they're like, they come into this practice and they're like, what the hell is this? I mean, it's
really, really hard.
It is. They can't, and these are top football players, they can't do a push-up. They can't do these, they can't get through our warm-up. You know what I mean? Why does kids usually don't like it? And because it's a tough,
it's hard,
damn sport, man.
Yeah.
And very little glory. And that leads me to my next question, right? Let's talk about a little bit about glory, right? NIL, Jody.
Wait, before we go there, Jody, can you react to that? Like, if a young kid, right, your kid's age, my kid's age, kind of to to your comment about Elijah, right? Early on crying. If somebody asked you that, what would you have said on like when to push, when to stop?
Yeah, that's interesting because 6 months is a long time. That's brutal.
Yeah, he's right. That's grinding. That's
Yeah,
grinding.
month 5, Jody, you would have told me, dude, it might not be for him.
No. But when kids come, it's like you said, it's
6 months is a long time.
They can't do push-ups. They struggle. They're breathing hard. Like, the tears are coming. Hey, just come back. The best thing you can do for yourself, come back the next practice. Don't try
paying the kid off like I did, making sure he comes back with little Hot Wheels.
Don't try to get out of it. Come back. It'll get easier, or it won't get easier. You'll get better at this, so, and all over longevity. And I see that even with like short-term camps, day one, they struggle and they are not who they should be or could be. But by day 5 or 14 or 30, the progress that you make is crazy. So that the best thing that you can do for yourself is just keep coming back. But yeah,
what's up with those bugs in there, Jody? What's going on?
I know. I don't know.
How'd they get in there?
There's one. It's just
You're
one.
gonna wear a beekeeper's
let me alone.
costume next time.
That's what happens with the young guns bugs. They're committed, right? They're persistent.
At the end of this conversation, he's gonna die. He can't do it right now.
All right, so I have 2 more questions. Right. Okay, so let's talk about NIL. I'm curious. There's not really a psychological answer to this, right? But I'm just maybe. But okay, so one of the cool things is that I deal with. I have other parents that are like, oh, they're and my daughter is in one of those sports that you can make some serious money, But I love about wrestling is that it is just, there is no final professional outlet. It is just about being the best you can be, working hard, falling in love with the hard work, getting into a really good school and starting business. Because, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to build with both of them is just businessmen and businesswomen.
Yep.
Right. So that is, sometimes I see the professional outlet as a bit of a distraction and a bit of a very, what is it? Less than 1% chance, it's like
of the sport, but
point something, yeah. Right? So they're falling in love with that goal, and things could happen, and if you focus on business, in my opinion, you're always going to be successful in it, right? So, but now I'm hearing, crazy dollar amounts definitely thrown to football and basketball and everything, but I'm also hearing it from other sports, kind of, trickling in to from other people trickling into wrestling. So what are your thoughts on it? Jody, is it good for the sport, bad for the sport? Do you feel kind of like I did? Like, oh man, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of making it a professional outlet. I don't know. I'm actually torn between it. I don't know if it's a negative or a positive.
Yeah, I'm very torn. And I guess not torn is the word. I'm very intrigued to see how this is going to work out. Because do I think it's amazing for young athletes to start making money? Yeah, I do, and I think that there's really, really great value in that. But it's going to be interesting. Like whenever you have an athlete, and this happens, in all areas of life, but it's going to be interesting in wrestling how this happens. Like you have an athlete, let's say he's making $500,000 and the assistant coach makes $75,000. Like, yeah, that's your coach. That's your mentor. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how that all works out.
Well, it happens in the NFL. I mean,
it happens in most. That's why this is a very sports side question, because it gets the culture, right? And that's where people, in my profession, are being hired by coaches and athletic directors, because to your point, Jody, that's a perfect example. And then think about teammate to teammate, right? I was the top paid guy last year, but then this guy just left, Penn State or whatever, and came over here. He's the top paid guy now. Well, what does that mean for and so there's group dynamics, there's team culture. There's also, then you have to get to like identity and principles of a team, right? And look, is it good for the sport, bad for the sport? I don't think I'm important enough for the sport to even have a vocal opinion on that. So I'll stay out of that part, right? But like, as far as like, it's very important, and it will continue to trickle down to, as guys, maybe they're high school teammates and like, well, I'd like to go to this school, right? But 10 years ago, I would have picked this school and go with my buddy, but now I'm not going to go because this school is going to pay me. And look, these are life-altering decisions. So it comes down to then not just team identity and principles, but all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, like, what are we teaching our kids, right? Character, commitment. What I think it comes down to is, how do you make that decision? Because everybody's different. right? Some people come from money, some people don't. Well, that's one of a million variables that makes how you deal with NIL different, right? So I think it, again, it comes down to how you treat people, how you present yourself, and whether you're talking about NIL or how you properly detach from the emotional stress of winning and losing, it's all going to come back to, do you know who you are? And does the decisions you make, whether it's the way you wrestle, the way you deal with NIL, present properly who you are, in my opinion.
Yeah, but it also makes it fair too, because, and again, I know I'm biased to this and everything like that, but I know that, compared to other sports, and I have, friends that have kids in other sports. I'm going to use baseball and I'm going to use football. It is nowhere near. Those sports are nowhere near as difficult as wrestling. Nowhere near as difficult. I mean, again, and I'm.
Or you mean like wrestlers should get more?
Yeah. Well, at least I'm just happy.
All three of us are in favor of that. Right?
I'm just happy. I'm just happy that they're getting something.
Yeah. I hear you.
Because it'd be, it's just, again, life's not fair in the whole situation, but yeah, it is going to be interesting, but I am glad that there's some money trickling down, and I'm hearing some pretty good numbers, like really good numbers. So that's great. All right. So I guess my last question, unless you guys have other things. So, you and I have talked about this also, faith, religion in the sport. I don't know, maybe because I don't watch that many other sports, but I've noticed it way more prevalent, way more, it's when you look at the finals, right? At the NCAA finals, everything is, Jesus and God and the whole situation. And you and I have talked about the psychological part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Jody, I guess I'll ask you, I mean, is there a correlation to more faith, based athletes and success, and is that something that you work with, or is that something that you influence, or what's your thought on that?
That's a great question. And I think wrestling is super important because it's just you out there, and other sports, you pass the ball and you can always blame someone, but in wrestling, and especially at the big time, like, there is a lot of pressure. You can try to say there's not, and how do you handle it, and all that stuff's super important, how you do handle it. But it is there, and it's more and more and more. The higher level you get, and cameras being shoved in your face. So I think that self-belief in yourself, and then realizing that there's more than just you. And different athletes handle that very, very different. But you do see it a ton right now, and I think there's a huge benefit for your faith, and everybody's different again, where you grow up, and United States versus different countries, but your belief is crazy important when you're out there in the biggest matches of your life.
So I have, if you want to finish that, I thought of one more, not a question, but a comment. And I want to know your guys' take on it, but I know you have an answer on that, because I've heard your answer on it.
Yeah. And look, this is a topic that I spend a lot of time on, from the standpoint of guiding somebody's mindset, because I am not a spiritual leader, right? Not supposed to be, not qualified to be, and shouldn't be in that role. And so it's this is such a fascinating question and topic to me, because I could have two, let's just call them clients. Let's say they're both wrestlers. And let's say one is, deeply entrenched in their faith, and it's part of who they are, and it helps them. And then one of the exact same talent level is not religious. So for me, in my role, right, as a mental conditioning coach, the job is to help them be as successful as possible, right? To give them the skills to get them to be the most elite version of what they can be. So the practical application of that, right, throughout my career is, well, for this person who is very faith-based, that's a part of it, right? And for this person who isn't, it's not, and it's not my job to convince them it should be or shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a conflict, because you can see your example, right? You see, and I'm in wrestling a lot, so you watch the Division I finals, right? You watch the interviews that guys like David Carr and Aaron Brooks give, and they're very open and authentic about their faith, and it clearly is a part of how it helps them. The question,
well, it's clearly everything.
Right, but the question to me, again, just in my silo of performance, right, not in all of life, because again, I'm not a spiritual leader, is, well, okay, well, how and why is that helping them? What part of it? And I think it comes back, Jody, to your answer, is like, well, everybody deals with pressure differently. And ultimately, the athletes that have made a choice at some point in their life to have a spiritual component to their performance. It's because they've made a conscious choice to have it be a part of their identity, their very authentic answer to who I am. Because this other topic of winning and losing that's kind of been sprinkled throughout this conversation, right? Well, winning is fun, right? But we don't want to make it too much about winning and losing. And that's a whole puzzle piece to put together. Part of it is how you do that properly, validating that we want to win, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's why we compete, but making it not the end all be all of it is very challenging if you haven't answered the question, who am I? What is my identity? And I think in that, for some people, if that's part of their answer, then what I would say to you is it is paramount to realizing your best performance. But it doesn't mean you have to do that to realize your best performance, would be my answer. You just have to go through the process of finding another way to answer the question, who am I? Because who am I is going to be the same in 7 minutes when this wrestling match is over, right?
Add to that too, with like, I was like, you know, with all the pressure and stuff, it's just you out there. And whenever you have a deep faith, like, then it's not just you, you know, you always,
it almost takes the pressure off, right? It almost takes all the pressure off, really, right? Because it's all up to God, right?
Right.
It's all
because I think
whatever God wants, right?
I think what Jody's saying is you're not alone, right? When someone would feel alone, you don't feel alone. But that doesn't mean.
Well, it gets confusing because if the other guy's religious too, then
well, then you're both on it, right? There's that.
I mean, who's like more, I guess?
But it's not about the other guy, right? We want to make it about ourselves, right? So I think the point is, though, that I would offer to somebody, again, because it is not my role to be a spiritual leader on this conversation. Like, I would say to somebody who came to me and said, look, I'm not religious, and if, you know, this guy's out there and he doesn't feel alone, I can see the peace that he feels in a high pressure situation. Well, how do I get that? Well, the answer is, who are you so that you're not alone? Maybe it's family. Maybe it's something. There are other ways to answer that question, but you have to go through the process that, you know, a faith-based track allows you to go through to have in high pressure situations. And by the way, forget about wrestling for a second, right? You're going to go through life. You're going to get fired someday. You're going to start a business someday. You're going to have a hard time making bills someday. You're going to fight with your wife someday and struggle with kids. Like, you don't want to be alone in those moments.
I don't fight my wife.
Of course not. Neither do I. But you know, if you can always come back to this guiding principle, that's where that source of confidence and peace and not feeling alone comes from. And there's different ways to get.
So the question, your answer you just gave right now kind of came because, you know, being religious or not has a lot to do with upbringing, right? So I was not raised religious.
In most cases, it does.
Even though my name is Jesus, which is pretty funny, that I'm not really a religious guy because I wasn't brought up religious, right? So then in turn, my kids are not, you know, born religious. They're not raised religious, right? Can I make an effort to it? Yeah, but it kind of seems to me, again, it kind of seems fake for me to do that. So we were kind of talking about, you know, listen, even though my parents did looking back now, they did something pretty cool. They're like, well, look, your grandfather's pretty religious. Go with him. Problem is, I didn't really like my grandfather too much, so that didn't help, you know. But he'd go to church with him. But that being said, your answer is more like, all right, well, if that religion is not really an option, or it's not something that's natural to you, or anything like that, how do you kind of duplicate, you know, I guess which
in its most simple form to me comes down to, you have to have an identity that is as secure and comforting to you as someone who is deeply faith-based. And again, it's not my job to have any judgment around which is better or worse. I think that, I mean, you've probably coached kids, Jody, that were deeply faith-based, and some, I would imagine, that are not, that, you know, had to find that source of comfort and peace from somewhere else, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. All right. So one last one. We've been at it for a while already. So this is more like a theory of mine. I want you to see if you guys think I'm crazy or if I'm right. So I think that there has been a huge improvement in the United States at the junior level and at the Olympic level. Just we've been in the last 20 years, we're just way better than we were before. Correct? That fair to say, as a country?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So I had a thought, and I think it has a lot to do with track wrestling and floor wrestling. Right? The fact that right, you could see a video. Right. So for example, my son, let's say he does, you know, 3 moves really, really well. Okay. And he has a big competition. The competition is going to be looking at his videos, and they're going to see that he has these 3 moves, and they're going to have the counter to those 3 moves, right? So you are forced to not be a 3-trick pony, and you're kind of forced to evolve, right? And if you do that and you multiply that by every kid in the United States, by every tournament, by every year, for the amount of years that this has been around, doesn't that kind of lift up the level of the entire country? And does that have something to do with how much better we've gotten? What do you guys think of that?
I think Jody's got to go first on that.
No, yeah, and I think you're right. Yeah, 100%. But if it's just to like look at technique and break down film, the cool thing about that is that it's not limited. Flow wrestling is not limited to the United States. You know, there's kids from, you know, China watching our guys wrestle. There's kids from Iran watching, you know, so it's interesting. That
I wonder if they do. You know that for a fact that they do?
100% they do. Yeah.
Yeah?
And they've attested that they've had more success around the world because of, you know,
really?
things like that. To me, I think it's a couple things. Obviously, I don't want to say clubs is like the main thing, but I think like when I was growing up, there was no clubs. You know, it was your elementary coach was coaching you, and he may have wrestled in high school and stuff. But you know, so I think that there's so many amazing clubs out there. If you look at the clubs and the leaders of the clubs, there's NCAA champions and Olympians and, you know, you name it, running all these youth clubs. And so 5 and 6-year-olds are getting coached by NCAA
Olympians.
champions.
And Olympians.
Like, so I think clubs have done a great job. Is there some harm there? Maybe, you know, sometimes, yeah, there is. You know, sometimes it takes away from school programs and stuff. So there's a fine balance there. And I don't want to say clubs is the best thing that's ever happened. I'm not saying that, but I think that, you know, success, clubs, and then the biggest one I think is the RTCs. You know, that now it's legal. Like our kids, our best kids are able to go to Pitt. They're able to go to Penn State. They're able to go to West Virginia. Mileage wise, they're allowed to go to Ohio State and work out for free with those college athletes and coaches. And so there's designated times when you can do that. You have to be in a certain mileage radius, but I think RTCs is a huge, huge reason that our kids are getting really, really good at a young age. And then, you know, there's more money. And whenever I was growing up, you know, even in the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, it wasn't like guaranteed you were getting paid that month. You know, and now that, you know, after you graduate, you're making a decent amount of money to keep training in wrestling. So I think that that's really cool. I think there's more financial backing. And I think like clubs and RTCs, along with, like you said, flow wrestling and media outlets. You know, when I was growing up, you couldn't watch the Big Ten channel and watch 2 dual meets on a Friday night. And now you can sit down with your family and watch 2 dual meets and record them and go back and watch and break down techniques. So I think there's a lot of value in kind of like the media, like you said, but then also like the actual coaches who are coaching our young kids, you know, and the exposure they're getting.
Yeah. And the videos that they go watch and everything. So
yeah, look, I would just add to that. I agree with everything both of you said. And from the standpoint of like, not just looking at how it's impacted wrestling, but from a mindset perspective, right? Like the access to information is great. And this, I get people upset at me sometimes in my world because I always say like, look, sports psych people, like nobody's ever heard of us, right? Somebody wants to hear about good coaching. I'll be like, well, go learn about Jody, right? Go learn about Nick Saban. Go, you know, like I'm not going to give you the name of a sports psychologist. I did a talk at a high school here. And one of the parents was like, oh, what resources would you suggest for, you know, our kids to read? And look, there are books you can read and there are certain sports psych type people that you can go follow. But at the end of the day, the way that, and this is funny for me to say because I'm not on social media at all because I don't really like social media, but the way that athletes like the guys, Jody, you've coached, like the guys that are wrestling at Cornell or Penn State, the way they can put out information for someone like me commenting a while back on like mentors and how you help have sustainable enjoyment, like go connect to your heroes because you can go learn from them. So like when I get athletes and their clients and their middle school age, I don't have them go read a book written by a sports psych person, right? I'm like, well, who are the athletes you like? And if it's a wrestler, I'm sure they're going to say names like Spencer Lee, right? Kyle Dake, Jordan Burroughs. Right? Okay, good. Well, then go learn what that person did because you can go find that information in flow interviews and other podcasts and their own social media channels. Like go become an expert in what made them successful and see what pieces work for you. And then, by the way, like as wrestling, we have kind of a wrestling hardcore mentality in our sport. Like go learn from Steph Curry, go learn from Tom Brady. Like what made the greatest people
Yeah,
who
yeah.
are
Athletes.
successful.
Athletes are
So the
athletes.
fact that, and now that all manifests itself in somebody who we mentioned earlier, like Bo Bassett, who's become such a popular athlete as a sophomore in high school, right, Jody? Right?
Junior, just started his junior year.
Just gonna be, yeah, just finished sophomore year, he just started about to be a junior, right? Like he's created such a platform, but a lot of his messaging that I very much enjoy as a professional in the mindset field is very mindset related. Like that didn't happen 10 years ago. And I think that it's all the things Jody said, right? He's getting access to certain RTCs and through Flow Wrestling, but he's also probably learning from athletes like a Spencer Lee that came before him and what made him great. And okay, now I can translate that to others. And I think this generation of athlete that we have, I'm getting younger and younger clients who are understanding, like if I want to be elite, I can't just be my body. It has to be my mind too. I think that's new, but the ability to learn it in a cool way, I guess boring to learn from somebody like me. Like go follow Bo Bassett on Instagram. You're going to learn very similar stuff. I'm just going to maybe help you be accountable.
Well, that being said, you and I met kind of organically. I don't know if I would have kind of reached out and focused that much, energy on the sports psychology, thinking, oh, they're kind of young now and the whole situation. But I will tell you that I am pleasantly surprised by the conversations that it's not what people think. It's not shrinky. It's not, I don't know. Doesn't feel medical. It feels
That's like at the beginning of the intro. There's a
Right.
difference between like mental health, psychology, and what sports psychology.
Yeah. So. It's conversational, and you're just, you're having conversations, and you're, and just kind of guiding, a thought. So, all right, guys. Man, thank you so much. Love you guys. Again, I'm lucky to have you guys in my life, and the fact that I could, call you guys and pick your brain is awesome. So I wanted to bring that, me being the amazing, not selfish human that I am. I wanted to bring that to everybody. So how do people get in contact with you for
yeah, you can find me. I just mentioned I'm on social media. So BobbyDughi.com is
spelled, the last name spelled kind of weird. So
Dughi.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I can't speak, higher. Again, it's very conversational. Give it a shot. You'll have, every athlete has kind of stuff that they're kind of stuck on. It could be minor, very minor, and it could be a huge thing. It's been great. It's been great for us in our house. So, and Jody, we've been going to you for what, 4 years now or something like that. So you come to Miami. We love when you come to Miami. So try to come, a lot more. Young Guns camps, right? Just Young Guns Wrestling Club, right, Jody? That's pretty much it.
For our camps, it's younggunswrestlingcamps.com. Yep.
Okay. So again, guys, thank you very much. I hope parents out there appreciate it. If there's any questions you guys have, whoever's listening to this that I didn't think of, let me know and I'll answer it on Instagram. So thank you very much, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you. Hey,
take care of those bugs, Jody.
Last question. When are we doing this again? That was an absolute blast. I learned so much just in that little bit.
No, that's awesome. I really want to go. I'm gonna definitely hate myself for a bunch of questions that I didn't ask. So I'll start. And people are gonna tell me, oh, why didn't you ask this and that? So I'll definitely want to do. I should be the last guy that takes the responsibility to better the sport, but I think this sport has done so much, and sports, has done so much for my kids and for me. I wouldn't be the successful businessman I am if it wasn't for sports. So I think people that don't play sports don't really understand how much it has to do with life. So yeah, if we could continue to kind of like come up with stuff and challenges and helping people kind of, and again, I'm in love with wrestling. I might even give myself cauliflower ear by myself on purpose, so I could fit in. So I could fit in with you guys a little bit more, Jody. You know what I mean? But yeah, I love you guys, and hopefully we can do this again. Thank you very much.
Awesome,
guys.
All right, guys. Thanks, Jody. Love you, bro.
Got it. We'll see you guys.
Take care of those bugs, man.